So, adepts of the patriarchy, have you come here to listen to the hot topic of sexual supremacy? Given the audience of the channel, it is clear against whom we, men, will unite in this war. But really, we will try not to offend anyone, and in our usual manner we will try to answer the question that was stated in one of the previous videos: why women are always late. We will cover the topic through Alvin Toffler's approach to civilizations. Again, at the center of this event is the factory. So let's take a look, brothers, at the sexual divide between man and woman. For those who have not watched our video, Our Lives as One Big Factory, which you most certainly should watch, I remind you that Toffler presents human history in 3 waves, which represent the 3 stages of society: agrarian, industrial, and informational. Around the world, these waves come at different times, however they all have the same impact on human life. In first-wave societies, work was done in the field or at home, with the whole extended family working together as an economic unit, and most of their products were destined for consumption within the village or feudal estate. Life at work and life at home were fused together, and since each village was mostly self-sufficient, the success achieved by the peasants in one place was in no way dependent on what happened in another. Even within a single production unit, most workers carried out various tasks, changing their roles according to the needs of the season, because of illness or by their choice. The division of labor in the pre-industrial period was very primitive. As a consequence, labor in first-wave agricultural societies was characterized by a low level of interdependence. But the second wave, the industrial wave, is taking its place. And it separated the consumer and the producer, a previously merged position. This has had a huge impact on family life, on the roles of sexual partners, and on the personal life of each of us as individuals. One of the most common sexual stereotypes of industrial society defines men as objective and women as subjective. Roughly speaking, it is as if men always logically determine what is in front of them and understand the cause of the event, while women are more interested in what color it is and what smell it has. If there is any truth in this, it lies not in the biology realm but in the psychological effects of the industrialization's invisible wedge. The second wave, rolling over England, France, Germany and other countries, moved work from the field and home to the factory and introduced a much higher level of interdependence. Work now required collective effort, division of labor, coordination and integration of different activities. The success of work began to depend on the carefully planned joint behavior of thousands of widely dispersed around the globe people, many of whom hadn't seen each other in their lives. The failure of a large steelworks or glassworks to deliver supplies required by an automobile manufacturer could, in certain circumstances, have repercussions that would extend across an entire industry or regional economy. In fact, even now in 2022, we are seeing echoes of the lingering conflict between rural and urban people in some places. Well, let's face it, whether we want it or not, we live in a world of stereotypes. This is some plain Jane and this is a gold-digging bitch. And in this case, as elsewhere, there is a grain of truth. But the nature of the conflict goes deeper than just people's appearance and where they reside. They don't understand or accept each other because they come from different eras. They have disagreements about the way of life, about the level of interdependence, responsibility and rewards. We can observe all that to this day, but imagine what it was like in the 19th and 20th centuries when the second wave was just beginning to gain momentum. For example, factory owners lamented that their workers were irresponsible. They had little regard for factory efficiency, went fishing when they were most needed, indulged in horseplay, or simply drank. In fact, most industrial workers at the beginning of the industrial period were villagers, accustomed to a low level of interdependence and more or less unaware of their role in the overall production process or in the mishaps, breakdowns and malfunctions caused by their irresponsibility. Moreover, since most of them were paid paltry wages, they could not have had a strong desire to worry about their work. In the conflict between these two labor systems, the new forms of work seemed to have won a triumph. More and more production was moving to factories and offices. The countryside was being deprived of its population. Millions of workers became part of highly interdependent networks. The work of the second wave left behind the retrograde old form of work associated with the first wave. But this victory of interdependence over self-sufficiency was never fully achieved. In one place, the old form of work stubbornly stood its ground. That place was the home. Every home remained a decentralized unit, engaged in biological reproduction, child-rearing and handing down cultural values. If there were no children in the family or the work of nurturing and preparing them for life was unsuccessful, this did not affect the performance of the same tasks in the family living next door. In other words, domestic work remained an activity with a low level of interdependence. The housewife continued to perform a number of essential economic functions as before. She was, so to speak, producing, but she produced for the use of her own family, not for the market. As the husband left the home to carry out direct economic activities, the wife usually remained in the background, doing indirect household work. The man was responsible for the more progressive form of work from a historical point of view, while the woman continued to do the older, more retrogressive form of labor. He was joining the second wave, and she was settling into the first one. It's as if he was moving into the future and she was staying in the past. The prevalence of factory production, the high cost of machinery, and the close interdependence of work process elements demanded a clearer and more precise synchronization. If one group of factory workers fell behind in their task, the other groups following them fell even further behind. Punctuality, which had never played a major role in farming communities, became a social necessity, and clocks of all kinds began to appear everywhere. By the 1790s, they were quite a common thing in Britain. As the English historian Edward Palmer Thompson notes,
a general diffusion of clocks and watches is occurring at the exact moment when the Industrial Revolution demanded a greater synchronization of labor.
Some people resisted the new industrial attitude to time, and this is where the differences between the sexes become apparent. Those who took part in the second wave, mainly men, were more likely to look at clocks and their watches. Husbands of the second wave era constantly complained that their wives kept them waiting forever, did not keep track of time, dressed too long, and were always late for appointments. Women, usually busy with unrelated to one another domestic chores, worked at a less mechanical pace. For similar reasons, urban dwellers tend to look upon rural people as stupid, slow, and untrustworthy.
They don't show up on time. You never know if they will come at the appointed hour.
The reasons for these kinds of complaints can be traced directly back to the differences between second-wave labor, based on increased interdependence, and first-wave labor, concentrated in the field and at home. It is understandable that running a household is not easy, and planning is also required there, but it is nothing compared to life in an office or a factory, where every day is planned down to the minute, with a foreman above you, a production manager above them, suppliers before you, and customers after you. And God forbid something in this chain does not make it in time. The division into consumer and producer has resulted in a split in personality and personal life. The social or collaborative nature of the factory and the office, the need for coordination and integration brought a special focus on objective analysis and objective relationships. Men, trained from childhood for their position in the factory, where they had to advance in a world of mutual dependencies, were encouraged to be objective. Women, from birth focused on reproductive functions, child-rearing and tedious domestic work, activities carried out primarily in social isolation. They were trained to be subjective and were often considered lacking the ability for any rational analytical thinking, which was thought to require objectivity. And now to the real thing. The men of the second wave were leaving home and mastering new forms of labor, while the women, well, not that they were forced, but they were expected to stay at home, raise children, cook, do the laundry and clean up. And let's leave the question out of the equation whether only men were really capable of successfully carrying out industrial tasks, or whether this was a convenient excuse not to do the first wave work. So, there you have it. On the one hand, women, you belong at home, you don't understand a single thing. But if suddenly there were women who were able to break out of the relative isolation of the household and get involved in interdependent production, they were often accused of ceasing to be feminine, growing up cold, rude, and objective. So, does being determine consciousness, or does consciousness determine being? Furthermore, stereotypes of sexual differences and the sexual roles of men and women have become even more acute due to the mistaken identification of men with production and women with consumption, although men are also consumers and women are producers. In short, although women were oppressed long before the second wave began to roll in, the modern battle of the two sexes can be traced from the conflict between the two styles of work and onwards to the separation of production and consumption. The split economy has also deepened the sexual divide. There are so many social phenomena in today's world, so we've come up with a lot of labels just so we don't get lost. And at this stage, if you say something like women are late or women are being discriminated against, you will immediately be put in one of the two camps without being asked. I prefer not to bring it up at all now. This video is just another description of how our lives have changed with the birth of industrialism, whether it is planned or capitalist. In fact, the whole video can be summarized into a couple of sentences. When industrialism came, it brought new principles, including global synchronization. Punctuality became a tool to work in rhythm, interdependence to carry out plans and secure supplies. Along with this, men developed the previously unseen habit of looking at the clock or his watch. And it was the people of the first wave, the people of the agrarian civilization, who were late and did not keep track of time. So it was not men who invented the stereotype that women are constantly late. This stereotype was invented by the people of the second wave about the people of the first wave. So, fellas, if your woman is constantly late, send her to the factory, or just wonder how her occupation affects her perception of life. Well, you know, it's strange to expect her to be able to hold a conversation on any topic if all she does in life is cook, clean, and watch dramas on Netflix. And again, for those who need it to be said point blank, first wave doesn't mean that all you do is grow potatoes. It means that you live in a rhythm of low interdependence. So if you're a determined housewife or an infantile computer nerd, then to some extent you could be classified as first wave, even if you can still binge watch YouTube. And our video comes to an end. Let's write in the comments that the factory is our everything. Like the video, hit the bell and share the video with friends. And I'm the researcher.